Hello, and welcome to this WISE 2021 session, Learning to Work Together, Building Robust Multi-Stakeholder Partnerships. Whether you're here with us in Doha or connecting from all over the world, thank you for joining us. I'm Sebastian Turbo. I'm the co-founder and chief strategist of Eco6, a Canadian-based consultancy working on learning ecosystems, and I'm also a WISE research fellow, also working on learning ecosystems. It will be my honor today to be moderating what will truly be a global conversation, because if I'm here talking to you live from the beautiful WISE studio in Doha, I am joined remotely by Ana Maria Rad from Chile and Karima Grant from Senegal. Karima, you are the founder and director of Imagination Africa, a nonprofit dedicated to building the capacity of the ecosystem around children in West Africa, and also the co-founder of Care Imagination, a social enterprise supporting working African parents and their families. Anna, you are, amongst many other things, founder of Fundación Reimagina and director of aprendoencasa.org, a digital ecosystem that promotes radical collaboration and collective impact between educational organizations from different countries in Latin America during the COVID-19 crisis. First of all, how are you both doing?
Super.
Super?
Absolutely proud to be with you all.
Okay. Anna?
Great, thank
Good.
you.
It's great to have you with us. To start a conversation, if you don't mind, I'd like to link our topic of multi-stakeholder partnership to this year's WISE theme, Generation Unmute. Indeed, if you ask me, as the world looks ahead, hopefully towards the end of the pandemic, and as we deliberate how to build back better, we still need to face pre-existing crises such as climate change, growing inequality, political instability, and of course, reimagining education. And if we want to fully harness the energy and the enthusiasm of the youth in order to address these multiple crises, it's time that we empower this muted generation. It's time to give learners more agency, more control over their learning. And it's time to realize that if we are truly to transform learning, we need all of us to acknowledge that education is everyone's business. That yes, we need to support formal education systems, but we also need to encourage many new informal learning pathways in and out of schools and universities. And of course, that we truly deliver on this conversation of multi-stakeholder partnerships. And actually, I think what really links Anna, Karima, and myself is that we're trying to achieve just that. More learner agency, leveraging new ways of learning, and building partnerships. And we're doing this through our focus and lens on learning ecosystems. On this idea that to liberate learning from past conventions, we need to work together as communities to connect learners in new and powerful ways with a diverse learning environments and diverse learning experiences within our communities. So Anna, Karima, I turn to you. Linking this conversation around multi-stakeholder partnerships and learning ecosystems. I know you've both adopted a learning ecosystem approach. I guess my question to you is, why so? And could you quickly and simply describe to us your learning ecosystem? Maybe I can start with you, Anna.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian, for the question. Well, it's clear that among other benefits of having a learning ecosystem, the promotion of equity is one of the most important. And the pandemic has shown us that the need to establish an extensive collaborative network. Schools need partners inside and outside the buildings to share their vision, and we need to bring the best experience to our students. So that's how Aprendo en Casa was developed, aprendoencasa.org, this ecosystem was developed to face this challenge. I mean, the pandemic has raised this problem of disconnecting everyone. So also we have to face the educational change that we have left behind for decades. So it emerged as basically as a very simple, low-cost digital solution, but also very highly collaborative and free of charge, and most important, in Spanish. So this ecosystem basically identifies, selects, and share top innovations. For example, the ones that Atentamente in Mexico are developing for social emotional learning, or strategies that Educando Juntos in Chile is developing, or Museo Moderno in Argentina. So This is an ecosystem designed with 70 organizations from very different countries. And that's why we started this, because we have a huge challenge of equity in the region.
Thanks, Anna. We'll come back to the question of equity in a few minutes, but Karima, let me turn to you. I know you're a strong believer in the power of informal learning, and you've also developed a learning ecosystem approach. So same as for Anna, could I ask you to quickly tell us why you feel this is an appropriate approach and how your learning system works?
Sure, thank you. Building on what Anna said, I think we both come from regions where equity is such an issue. And one of the things that we've noticed is that children, young people can't be empowered if their communities aren't empowered. And so it's very important that we change the paradigm of learning from one being in schools, one being concerned with just about brain development, because we understand learning is not a one-way street. It's not limited just to classrooms. So our model is very simple. We connect the players. We look at who are all the players that are around children. We connect them. We really empower them with knowledge, information, and resources. And then we do the work of really looking at where their priorities are, where they understand how they can better support children. And that's now the next thing is how do we do the co-creation? How do we do the co-visioning of what that particular ecosystem would look like if children were empowered? What would need to be happening in that system? So again, for us, we're connecting parents, we're connecting teachers, we're connecting local artists, local handymen also too, plumbers sometimes, just to all participate in supporting. And for us, it's very young learners. We're really very, very interested in supporting young learners before they even get into classrooms.
So just to better understand, so for example, you're connecting learners with plumbers in terms of learning plumbing skills, for example?
So for instance, well, sometimes just being able to teach us some of the basics about where water comes from. You know, when you're working in communities where toilets are not a necessity or piping is not a necessity, it's very important that children understand how pipes work, how toilets work. So we've done programs where we've brought the local handymen in to come in and to teach children the knowledge they have. And very often what that does is that shifts children's understanding of who has knowledge, who holds knowledge, what this knowledge is useful for. And when we're thinking about community development, we're not just thinking about community development from the paradigms of somebody external who has to come in, but what needs to happen in this community for development to happen.
Okay. Anna, do you want to comment on that? On this idea of connecting learners, not only with formal learning opportunities, but also with these very informal, community-based learning opportunities?
Absolutely. Because if we're thinking about learnings, we know that the lack of interest and transformative learning experience, plus the disconnection with the real meaning of education, has a brutal impact on school dropout and learning output. So for that reason, we have to connect students, young people, with the real world. And that connection is happening inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So we also bring together museums, organizations that are working on STEM, of course, organizations that are based on educational strategies, artists and people from the astronomy. So we can really enhance and enrich the environment where students are and young populations are learning inside and outside.
Mm-hmm.
And on that, I mean, you've kind of both touched on it, but you know, for our audience who is maybe less familiar with this concept of learning ecosystems, what are for you the key benefits both for learners themselves, but also in addressing educational and societal challenges? I know you've both mentioned equity, but do you see learning ecosystems as an approach that can help us as communities address some of these challenges?
Go ahead, Anna Maria.
Okay. Yes, you were mentioning equity, but we have to mention also relevance. If we want to have a relevant education and a relevant process of learning, we have to open up our vision of education and our vision of learning. So relevance, equity, and quality for me are the reason why we need to support ecosystem, because at least I understand that education is also a process of learning in a long-term period, inside the classroom, with others, through others. And we understand that cities are part, I mean, the urban landscape is also part of the learning process. And today, more than ever, we have to develop these 21st century competencies: creativity, critical thinking, the way we collaborate. And we can learn that from many areas and aspects of the world. So for me, the benefit of having this approach is, of course, equity, but also relevance. Relevance as a way to really shorten the gap between those children that have more access to transformative education and those who has not.
Karima, on your end, the key and main
Yeah,
benefits of go ahead.
yes, I'm echoing everything you say, because I think the idea of working with learning ecosystems is really challenging the paradigm of how education has happened, particularly, I think, in regions like ours, where education has always been about the best and the brightest, leaving communities and going off, and perhaps doing something with the hope that they'll return to bring, resources to communities. Whereas I think the idea of learning ecosystems is, how do we build an educational process where all communities benefit? So that it's as I think, as Ana Maria said, it's about relevance. It's about what communities are going to prioritize are important for children to learn. Who are the actors that are important for children to learn from? On the other side, Ana Maria, you talked about projects that were in Mexico that are doing about social emotional learning. The opportunity for children, and I think particularly for children in Africa and other parts of the world, to be able to look at their communities as places where there are resources and strengths, does enormous for children's self-esteem. Because for many children who are coming from under-resourced communities, that aspect of what I can become is very often determined by who I see. And so it's very, very important that if we can build up, my father, we talked about the plumber, but if my father is being seen as somebody who has an opportunity to contribute to educational processes, that changes the child's perception of themselves. So it's absolutely essential that we redefine education as a process that actually builds and connects communities, and not just disassociates the very best learners, even if they're so-called transformative practices inside classrooms, but they still inadvertently disassociate high achievers with their communities.
And so, well, building on that, Karima, when you're looking at these learning ecosystems, you're talking about, partnerships and community engagements. And I think the core of today's session is really, how do you build these partnerships within these learning ecosystems? And here, I'm thinking, how do you build these core, these core partnerships to run and manage the learning ecosystem? But then, how do you engage, this wider range of learning providers? The plumbers, the cities, the businesses, and how do you engage communities at large in believing in the power of a learning ecosystem approach? And here I'm thinking, educators, caregivers, parents, policymakers. So, how did you both within your own ecosystems manage building that collaboration, that level of understanding, this kind of shared vision and purpose towards this approach?
Ana Maria?
Okay, so I think one of the key element for us has been to develop an ecosystem that is based on real and local demands. And the only way to do that is by listening, by really understanding what is happening in our communities. How do we do that? By connecting these organizations, 70 organizations around 10 countries in Latin America, that have their heart, their feet in the ground, looking for these needs. So a key factor of this process of aligning the partners organizations with the concrete priorities, we have developed a common strategy, like a roadmap, articulating in one hand the needs, and the other one the propositions, the the programs or the ideas that they have. So some of the priorities are defined by the organization. Some of the priorities are defined by the users of our platform. For example, we understand that 90% of the organization of the Aprendo en Casa ecosystem are preparing educators for the 21st century, are generating more evidence and information about how can we engage students. So we are providing the context, the time framework, and the work to share that vision and to bring the different programs and solutions into a more robust and common ground. So for me, it's important to listen, to understand, but to bring the needs from the local organizations that are really working in each of the countries.
Thank you, Anna. And I guess, Karima,
Yeah.
if Anna has been talking, I guess, of this core group of partners. I think in your case, there's lots of interesting lessons to be learned from your work with more like communities at large, like with parents and caregivers.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about that? How have you managed to raise awareness and onboard this wider community around your approach?
Yeah, so again, we begin also with listening and also getting different stakeholders. So, for instance, whether it's been teachers, whether it's been preschool teachers, whether it's been the inspectors who are representatives of the educational system, the formal educational system, the Ministry of Education, whether it's been government workers, whether it's been health workers, really bringing them together to listen to each other's concerns, really. So we're not only listening to their concerns, but really supporting them listening to each other's concerns. Because particularly when it comes to young children, everybody has their own strategy, everybody has what they want to achieve, but really understanding what the ecosystem can achieve together does really necessitate that we're listening to each other. So it's a lot of work of bringing people together, a lot of work of people listening and asking questions together, and hearing where each other's priorities are and understanding how the priorities of one group. So for instance, the government workers, for them, it was so very important that children be registered. So even though that didn't seem to have a direct effect on what we want to seek as better learning outcomes, it did mean that we would have some ecosystem members that could be fully present because their needs in having an increasing birth certificate or parents being able to register their children, that supported what they needed. So that number one was listening. The second thing also required for us to get out of the way, very often, as us coming in, our role is as facilitators. And sometimes it's very hard to negotiate facilitation because people sometimes see you as, oh, okay, you're the resource holders. But you really do have to be able to say, no, we're facilitating. We're really actually supporting to make sure that we're holding processes that are there. And then I think the third thing that we've done is a lot of communication outside of the ecosystem. So not only communication within the ecosystem, but communication outside the ecosystem. Because we found there's a lot of informal ideas about how children learn, about who children are, that can sometimes impede even how we understand why an ecosystem needs to be built. So for us, it's really been those four pillars of really, really listening, facilitating, and then also really spreading the message and communicating also too about the greater ideas for them to better support the ecosystem development.
I like it, Karima.
May I mention?
Go ahead, Anna. Please. Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to mention something that came up because you, Sebastian, have been saying a lot about this concept of living laboratory. So what Karima is saying, and I agree, is that we have to listen, but we also have to collect evidence, practices, field data, and translate that into new educational solutions. So we are always not only connecting and bringing good ideas into practice, but also redesigning new solutions in this ecosystemic vision. For example, what we did in Aprendo en Casa was to bring four main strategies from different countries into a new, like a workshop for teachers around Latin America. So what I want to say here is that having this engagement is not only the process of delivering good will and programs, but also to redesign new educational solution. And that is a laboratory approach, a living laboratory approach that I think is very important to understand and to engage with.
Well, thank you for that, Anna. And actually, with WISE, we're currently leading a living lab on learning ecosystems. Believe it or not, we have 2 minutes left. So I'll have a last question for both of you. It's a question I've been, lots of people have been mentioning over the past 2 days at WISE around learning ecosystems is, and I know it's a tricky question, is, are learning ecosystems here to support the formal education system, or should learning ecosystems be looked at a way to completely transform education and learning? Would you have a position on that, or on this spectrum of only supporting what exists to fully replacing what exists? Where would you position your vision in terms of the power and the potential of learning ecosystems? Tricky question, I know.
Go ahead, Anna. I don't know if you want to start, Anna.
No, I just want to mention that for me, we need to redesign education in order to have really inclusion and relevance. So this approach is to accelerate this transformation that in case of Aprendiz en Casa started with the pandemic, but we have decades of low quality education. So I think it's a unique opportunity to bring this conception of education with a broader vision, meaning that we can learn inside and outside schools with teachers and with other people around. I think this is the time to transform education. And ecosystems are a good way to do that. We have to share vision, have common and clear goals, and provide the right opportunities to engage with the students' learning. They are looking for better experiences inside and outside the classroom. And if we want to revert that, if we want to change that, we have to redesign education.
That's
Okay.
it.
Karima?
Absolutely. I just, at 120%, the famous quote of Albert Einstein that says, a problem can't be solved at the same level as it's created. It's not working. We all know that. That's why we're blessed to be here at WISE. And the lessons of the pandemic broke down and made it obvious to everybody what wasn't working. So we're absolutely about transforming and changing paradigms, because the paradigms around learning and education are the current ones, are producing the inequity, these questions of social justice, these problems of leadership, just sort of all of these issues that the world is facing, but is certainly having greater impact in certain regions, certain communities, on certain marginalized people around the world. So absolutely, without a question, we're transforming education. I think there's some merit to certain educational systems, and one of the things that we hear in countries like ours is, go slow, what are we changing to? But I think the work that we have that the pandemic has given us is, just as Ana Maria said, it's time for revisioning. And revisioning has to be done on the community level. So it's pertinent and necessary for community development, because we can no longer afford to separate education, learning from community development, from equity and these questions of social justice. So.
Thank you, Karima, for these closing and inspiring words. Thank you very much to all. It's unfortunately already time to close. I will invite everyone here at WISE in Doha to join the closing plenary session for today, for the WISE Awards ceremony, and for those of you online as well. Anna, Karima, thank you very much. I really look forward to meeting you in person soon, inshallah. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to everyone here in the audience. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.